everyone. Thank you so much again for inviting me to moderate the panel this afternoon. I'm honored to be here and wanted to go ahead and introduce the panelists at this time. The first panelist that will be speaking today is Carmen Lomellin. Carmen was the U.S. ambassador to the OAS, which is the Organization of American States, from 2009 through 2014. In 1998, she was appointed to the position as OAS Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Commission of Women, the CIM, by Secretary General Cesar Gaviria. She served as CIM Executive Secretary until March of 2009. In that position, she provided guidance and direction to the OAS member states and Permanent Secretariat on hemispheric policy, advancing issues affecting women, particularly in the areas of human rights and gender equality. During the Clinton administration, Ambassador Lomellin held the positions of White House liaison for the U.S. Office of Personnel Management and director of that agency's Office of International Affairs. She was an advisor on Hispanic affairs to the White House Office for Women's Initiatives and Outreach. She is a proven leader in Western Hemispheric foreign policy development and implementation. Let's give her a round of applause, and she will speak for a few minutes, and then I'll introduce the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not tech savvy enough to do a PowerPoint, so please bear with me. First of all, and I'm going to thank you so much for the introduction. I'd like to thank Florida International University, Dr. Mora, and of course the Human Rights Foundation for hosting this very important event. The work you are truly doing the Lord's work, and I can't tell you how inspired and humbled I am to be here and listening to the really brave women that are day-to-day confronting the challenges to democracy and the challenges to human rights in their countries. I cannot admire them enough, and again, I feel very humbled to be in their presence. We were given the instructions just to talk a little bit about how we got to the political aspects of our life, what led us there, and then how we saw the role of women certainly in foreign policy and in political leadership. I can say one thing: political involvement was probably the last thing on my mind. I grew up in a small steel town outside the city of Chicago. My parents were Mexican immigrants. My first job out of high school was working the midnight shift at the steel mills, typing up invoices, a job that I held for about 7 years. I couldn't go straight to college because, of course, I was a girl. My father was very traditional. I had to work to help support my family. And for a lot of us, this is not unusual. The interesting thing is, when my brother graduated from high school, my father told him, "Hijo, wherever you want to go to college, donde quieras, por favor. I'll work 2 or 3 jobs if I had to." Of course, he didn't want to go to college, which I found interesting. So I put myself through college, going to night school for 14 years, really, to get both of my degrees. And I was on a corporate track. I had gotten an MBA, and I'm thinking, oh yeah, I'm just going to really rise to the ranks, except it wasn't happening. And I knew I had to make some kind of career change. And this is the change that completely turned my life around. I went to work for MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund, where I was the director of leadership training Latinos, Latinas on how to get on boards, how to become more active in their communities. But for me, being in that position, I went into the Latino communities in Chicago, primarily working with women. I saw the young girls, 14, 15-year-olds, pregnant with other little babies. I saw kids that were dropping out of high school because they weren't being challenged. I saw the fact that our people were working 2 and 3 jobs with very little pay and no insurance and no benefits. And I also saw that there were the political leaders of the city of Chicago making the decisions for my community without any input from my community. So I started working with some of the community organizers and the activists on issues of importance. First and foremost, the importance of voting, the importance of citizenship and voting. I clearly remember one specific case where I was talking to this elderly Mexican lady trying to see if she would get out and vote. And I said, señora, ya está inscrita para las votaciones. No, mija, no puedo, no soy ciudadana. And I said, bueno, ¿dónde nació? Nací en Texas. You know, that's frightening. All her life, she had never participated in the electoral life of this country because she didn't think she was a citizen. So I decided to become very active in politics. Chicago politics is very unique. So it was an interesting experience, and I learned a lot I just learned a lot. And I think one suggestion I would make to the young people, whatever your political affiliation is, get involved in politics. It is one of the best training grounds. You learn organizing skills, you learn public relations skills, you learn issues development, and you develop a network that will eventually get you where you are, which is how I got into the further political track. I was involved locally in a lot of political races, but then I became one of the first people involved in the early Clinton campaign, the first one. And I met Hillary Clinton and traveled with her during the first campaign. And I very soon became in the community, the Latina that a lot of people came to for advice. I didn't really know much of anything, but I never let them know. When President Clinton was elected, I was asked to come out to Washington to serve in his administration and was appointed to work in the White House Women's Office. We developed a very interesting initiative while there. It was called At the Tables, and that was an initiative where people went out into the community, appointees, when they traveled and met with women leaders, not political leaders, community leaders, to get a sense of what people were thinking, what people were saying, what were the definite needs in the community. And that was such a way to really get the pulse of what was going on. After the Clinton administration, and I'm really trying to rush this so everybody gets a chance to talk. After the Clinton administration, I was offered the position of head of the Inter-American Commission of Women for the Organization of American States, an amazing organization with a very long and proud history. And one of the big surprises for me was that the issues that I was dealing with at the commission were the very same issues I was dealing with in the Latino communities in Chicago. Gender discrimination, inequity in pay, lack of access to information, lack of access to justice, human rights violations, civil rights violations, on a much more expanded level, in a much broader level, but they were the same. And we spent a lot of time working particularly on gender-based violence. It is rampant in the region. It is rampant throughout the world. Still, after all this discussion, after all these conventions, after all these promises on the parts of governments, we still have very serious problems. I was speaking just last week in New York with the head of an organization called Equality Now, and it's a global women's human rights organization. And she was telling me she was talking about the issues with some of the Middle Eastern countries. And she told me that what they're seeing here in the United States is a sharp increase in the cases of female genital mutilation in the United States. Mm-hmm. And that is probably one of the most extreme forms of violence that can be perpetrated on any young woman. So the challenges still remain. Now, I certainly am speaking to the choir. You are all very well versed on a lot of the actions that are being taken, a lot of the work that's being done in this particular area. But I think one of the encouraging things is that we are seeing the women stepping up to the plate, women demonstrating their leadership and taking on the very, very difficult issues in their country. There's been a lot more participation at the political level. Obviously, right now, there are 5 women heads of state: Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago. But we're also seeing an increase in political involvement at the local levels. For example, 25% of elected officials in parliaments and legislatures are women, 25% in city councils, 24% in the high courts, and 11.7% at the mayoral level. So we're getting there. It's a lot of work, and there are a lot of challenges still remaining. I think you can make the case that perhaps the quota laws in a lot of countries are having a positive impact. Research shows that 30% participation of women is the critical mass to really create change and impact legislation and build coalitions to move legislation forward. So there are 12 countries in the region that have electoral quotas for women. 30% is pretty much the average. Costa Rica, on the other hand, has the highest quota, 40%, which I think is admirable. And I think the reason women do get involved when they get involved are very personal reasons. They see that there's something wrong in their community. There is something wrong in their city or in their state. The schools are bad. They want better schools for their children, access to jobs, all the social issues that really propel a woman into a political life. And I think, especially my colleagues that have worked on these issues for all these years, is that women have a different way to approach certain issues. I was in Nicaragua a few years back. We were doing a project on basically gender-based budgeting. Small town in Nicaragua. And what they did, the process was very interesting. They took the men and the women, and they trained them and taught them what a budget is, how it works, what it means for a local community. Then they separated the men and the women to get their feedback. They asked the men, if you could have a say-so in how the budget's spent, what would you do? What would you want? The men responded. They wanted soccer fields. They wanted more recreation. They wanted lights for their soccer fields. The women wanted better schools. They wanted paved roads so their feet wouldn't get cut up when they went to the mills to grind their corn. They wanted hot houses, viveros you call them, I think, greenhouses, so they could grow flowers, sell them, make money, and help support their families. Big difference, big difference. I think in looking at where we are politically in political leadership with women in the region, there are challenges and bright spots. Recently, an article by Jolynn Shoemaker of CSIS, she highlighted some of the recent challenges rather. Having, and this is an important point, sometimes we grumble about it, but it's true, having some key female figures in highly visible, powerful roles hasn't really solved the female underrepresentation problem. I think it's fair to say that women in positions of leadership don't necessarily have a gender perspective. We hope they do, we expect that they do, but they sometimes don't. Women, personal challenges, women still have the primary responsibility for the home. I'm always amused when they ask a woman politician, well, how are you going to balance, your job and raising a family? I have yet to hear anybody ask that of a man. They just don't. The work-life concerns exist, inflexible schedules, really oftentimes unrelenting travel, constant pressure to be in the office and busy and working are pretty common features of some of these positions, and the jobs that will get you to the positions certainly in the foreign policy world. And there is burnout. A lot of these jobs are very demanding. You work very long hours with very little recognition. And one other key point is the lack of sponsorship or mentorship. Women, they do recognize the need for advocates, for mentors that'll open the door, but it also doesn't often happen. But the male colleagues always seem to have somebody that's shepherding them through, that's providing them, after work guidance or guidance on the golf course on, you should meet this person, or let me introduce you, or you might want to take this direction. I think that's where we have a lot more work to do. Some of the bright spots, I think, that we can be glad for, and I've got a couple minutes left, is the collective influence of women leaders. For example, at a recent UN meeting, there was the call to action on gender equality on the 20th anniversary of Beijing, really where the women heads of state got together to demand action of the governments. Other examples, in the year 2000, the Declaration of Mexico on Security in the Americas that for the first time looked at the social aspects and the impact of women facing serious security challenges in the region. And also the Inter-American Democratic Charter. There is a clause that talks about participation of women in democracies. That particular piece was put in by a former Salvadoran ambassador to the OAS, Margarita Escobar, a terrific woman. They were done with the negotiations, and she made them reopen that document to make sure that there was some kind of statement on women. I think if listening to the presentations, I think it's very clear that we need to teach our young women. And I think it was one of the speakers that talked about, from Cuba, that talked about how she talks to her children about what she's doing and why she's doing. We need to do that more with our young women. I think we need to get them away from Barbie dolls and beauty pageants and focus a little bit more on the realities of life and their role in impacting society. With that, I'll stop, and I look forward to your questions.